Working the night shift at Walmart was never the highlight of my week. The sterile fluorescent lights seemed to drain the life out of everything, casting harsh shadows that danced eerily on the linoleum floor. But the pay was decent, and it was a job, so I couldn't complain too much. One particular night, as the clock ticked closer to midnight, I found myself manning the customer service desk. It wasn't a particularly exciting job. I spent most of my time handling returns and dealing with the occasional irate customer. But that night was different, as I would soon discover. I had just finished processing a return when I saw him. He stood at the entrance, lingering in the faint-lit vestibule. His silhouette was framed by the automatic sliding doors, and something about him immediately sent a shiver down my spine. The man was tall and gaunt, his features obscured by the hood of his tattered coat. He wore dark, worn-out jeans that seemed to sag under their own weight, and his shoes were scuffed and filthy. But what really caught my attention were his eyes, or rather the lack of them. His face was hidden in the shadows, and I couldn't make out any facial features, just two dark voids where his eyes should have been. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but when I looked again, his unsettling gaze remained. It was as though he had no eyes at all, just empty sockets staring into the store. I felt a freezing sensation, and I couldn't tear my gaze away from him. As the automatic doors slid shut behind him, he stepped into the store, his footsteps almost inaudible on the polished floor. I watched in a mix of curiosity and unease as he moved deeper into the store, his hooded head bowed slightly as if in contemplation. I quickly glanced around the store to see if any of my coworkers had noticed the strange man, but they were all busy with their tasks, oblivious to his presence. Part of me wanted to alert someone, call security, or at least keep an eye on him, but another part of me hesitated, unsure of what to make of the situation. After all, he was just a customer, albeit a peculiar one. I decided to keep an eye on him from the customer service desk, rationalizing that it was my job to monitor the store. As I watched, he wandered aimlessly through the aisles, occasionally picking up an item, only to put it back haphazardly. His movements were jerky, almost mechanical, and there was an unsettling air of purposelessness about him. Time seemed to stretch as I observed him, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. It was as though he didn't belong here, as if he were a glitch in the system, an anomaly in the orderly world of Walmart. As the minutes turned into hours, the store grew quieter, and the few remaining customers hurried through their shopping, eager to leave. The man, however, remained, seemingly unfazed by the late hour. It was almost as if he were waiting for something or someone. I watched him for what felt like an eternity, my unease growing with each passing moment. Then, to my surprise, he abruptly stopped in front of the customer service desk, his empty gaze fixed on me. My heart pounded in my chest as I met his eyeless stare, and a cold sweat formed on my brow. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, my voice quivering slightly. He didn't respond. Instead, he extended a bony hand, the fingers unnaturally long and thin, and placed a crumpled piece of paper on the counter. I cautiously picked it up and unfolded it, my eyes widening in shock as I read the scrawled message. "They're coming for you." My heart raced, and I looked up at the man, my mind racing with fear and confusion. "Who's coming for me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The man remained silent, his hooded head still bowed. I felt a growing sense of dread, as though I had stumbled into a nightmare from which there was no escape. I decided to call for help. I picked up the store phone and dialed the security extension, but there was no answer, just static on the line. Panic welled up inside me as I realized I was on my own, with this mysterious man who seemed to defy reason. I glanced around, hoping to catch the attention of one of my coworkers, but they were all preoccupied with their tasks, oblivious to the tension that had gripped the store. It was as if I were trapped in a parallel reality, isolated with this enigmatic stranger. I turned my attention back to the man who had now stepped closer to the desk, his hood concealing his face even more. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice quivering. He finally spoke, his voice low and raspy, sending a shiver down my spine. "I am a harbinger of the inevitable," he said cryptically. I didn't know what to make of his words, but they filled me with a sense of foreboding. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small, worn-out photograph. He slid it across the counter toward me, and my hands trembled as I picked it up. The photograph was old and faded, depicting a group of people standing in front of a dilapidated house. It looked like it had been taken decades ago. Among the people in the photo, one figure stood out, the man himself, his face whole, his eyes filled with life. I looked up at him, my confusion deepening. "Is this you?" He nodded slowly. It was once. I couldn't make sense of it. The man in the photograph bore no resemblance to the eyeless, hooded figure before me. "What happened to you?" I asked, my curiosity overcoming my fear. He didn't answer directly, instead choosing to speak in riddles. "I have seen the depths of the abyss, tasted the darkness that lies beyond the veil of reality. I have glimpsed the true nature of existence, and it has taken everything from me." I didn't know what to say. His words were both cryptic and unsettling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something beyond my understanding. Suddenly, the store's intercom crackled to life, the sound echoing through the empty aisles. "Attention Walmart associates," a voice announced. "We have received a report of a suspicious individual in the store. Please be on the lookout and report any unusual activity to security." My heart sank as I realized the announcement was about the man standing before me. I had to act quickly. I grabbed the phone and dialed the security extension again, hoping someone would pick up this time. To my relief, a voice answered on the other end. "Security, what's your emergency?" I quickly explained the situation, the strange man, the cryptic message, and the unsettling photograph. The security officer assured me they would dispatch someone immediately. As I hung up the phone, I turned to the man who had remained strangely calm throughout the ordeal. "Security is on their way," I said, my voice trembling. "You need to stay here until they arrive." He nodded, seemingly unfazed by the impending arrival of security. "I will wait," he said softly. Minutes felt like hours as I stood behind the customer service desk, the man standing before me, his hooded head bowed in contemplation. The store remained eerily quiet, the harsh fluorescent lights casting long shadows that seemed to dance in rhythm with my racing heart. Finally, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence. Two security officers, clad in blue uniforms, entered the store, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I rushed to meet them, explaining the situation and pointing to the mysterious man. The security officers approached the man cautiously, their flashlights illuminating his hooded face. They exchanged wary glances as they questioned him, but he remained cryptic and evasive, offering no concrete answers. As the officers handcuffed him and led him away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The ordeal was over, and I could finally breathe easy. But even as I watched him being escorted out of the store, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, that the man's enigmatic words held a deeper meaning. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that unsettling night at Walmart began to fade. Life returned to its usual routine, and I tried to put the bizarre encounter behind me. Then one evening, as I was leaving work, I found a small envelope waiting for me at the customer service desk. It was addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize. I cautiously opened it and found a single piece of paper inside, along with another faded photograph. The photograph depicted the same group of people standing in front of the dilapidated house. But there was something different about it. The man who had been eyeless in the previous photograph now had eyes, dark and piercing, staring into the camera with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. On the back of the photograph, a message was scrawled in the same handwriting as the envelope. "The abyss is patient. It waits for those who seek to understand its secrets. Beware the truths you seek, for they may consume you." I couldn't make sense of it. Who had sent me this message, and what did it mean? The enigmatic encounter at Walmart had left me with more questions than answers, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I had stumbled upon something beyond my comprehension. As I left the store that evening, the harsh fluorescent lights casting long shadows around me, I couldn't help but wonder what other mysteries lay hidden in the most ordinary of places, waiting to be discovered by those brave or foolish enough to seek them out. Working at Walmart was never glamorous, but it paid the bills. I was just an ordinary employee, one among the sea of blue vests, stacking shelves and dealing with the quirks of everyday customers. The store was a monotonous place, predictable and unchanging. That was until I started working under Manager Phillips. Manager Phillips was a tall, middle-aged man with graying hair and an unassuming demeanor. He wasn't particularly friendly, but he wasn't unkind either. He ran the store efficiently, and that's what mattered to most of us. However, there was something about him that made me uneasy from the very beginning. It started with the way he looked at us, his employees. His gaze was penetrating, as if he were trying to read our souls. It was a look that lingered too long, that made you want to squirm and look away. But I couldn't deny the effectiveness of his management style. Our store was running like a well-oiled machine, and our sales numbers were steadily climbing. One day, as I was restocking the canned goods aisle, I overheard a hushed conversation between two of my co-workers, Rachel and Mike. They were whispering about Manager Phillips and the strange things they had seen him do. My curiosity got the better of me, and I moved closer to eavesdrop. "He's always in the break room during his lunch break," Rachel said, her voice barely audible. "And he locks the door behind him." Mike nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and I've seen him go out to the parking lot late at night, sometimes after everyone else has left. It's weird, man." I had noticed some odd behaviors from Manager Phillips myself, but I had brushed them off as quirks. Now, hearing my coworkers' concerns, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the man than met the eye. That evening, after my shift, I decided to follow Manager Phillips. It was a foolish and impulsive decision, driven by a curiosity I couldn't ignore. I watched from my car as he left the store, his figure disappearing into the night. I trailed him at a distance, my heart pounding in my chest. He drove to a remote area outside of town, a place I had never been before. He parked his car near a secluded pond, and I watched as he got out and walked to the water's edge. In the dim moonlight, I saw him raise his hands, palms up, and begin to speak in a low, almost hypnotic voice. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone of his voice was dark and cold. It was as though he were engaged in some kind of ritual. I watched in stunned silence as Manager Phillips continued his strange behavior. He stayed by the pond for what felt like hours, his movements deliberate and purposeful. It was clear that whatever he was doing was deeply important to him. Finally, he returned to his car and drove back to the store, seemingly unaware that he had been observed. I waited a few minutes before I followed him back, my mind racing with questions and suspicions. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong with Manager Phillips. I kept a close eye on his actions, documenting the strange occurrences I witnessed. It became an obsession, something I couldn't let go of. One day, I decided to confide in Rachel and Mike, the co-workers I had overheard earlier. I told them about what I had seen at the pond, and they shared their own observations. It was clear that we all had a growing sense of unease about our manager. Rachel had noticed that Manager Phillips seemed to have an uncanny ability to predict when the store would be busy or when a major sale would occur. It was as though he had insider information that the rest of us didn't. Mike, on the other hand, had discovered that Manager Phillips had access to a room in the back of the store that no one else did. It was a small, windowless space, and the door was always locked. Mike had tried to ask about it, but Manager Phillips had brushed off his inquiries, claiming it was simply a storage room. As our suspicions grew, we decided to do some digging. We scoured the store's records and discovered that there were financial irregularities that seemed to be connected to Manager Phillips. Money was unaccounted for, and inventory seemed to vanish mysteriously. It was as though the store was bleeding money, and Manager Phillips was at the center of it all. One evening, as we were discussing our findings, Rachel had a breakthrough. She had been looking into Manager Phillips's background and had discovered that he had a history of involvement with a secretive and obscure religious group. The group's beliefs were unconventional, to say the least, and its members were known for their eccentric rituals. It all clicked into place. Manager Phillips' strange behavior, his ability to predict the store's fortunes, the locked room, and now his connection to this enigmatic religious group. It was all part of a puzzle that we were determined to solve. We decided to confront Manager Phillips with our suspicions. We confronted him in his office one evening, armed with our evidence and the determination to uncover the truth. He listened to us calmly, his expression unreadable. When we presented our findings, his only response was a chilling smile. "You've been very observant, haven't you?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But you have no idea what you're getting into." We demanded answers, but Manager Phillips refused to divulge anything more. Instead, He warned us to drop our investigation and forget everything we had discovered. It was a veiled threat, and we knew we were treading on dangerous ground. Undeterred, we decided to take our concerns to higher-ups in the company. We believed that they needed to know about Manager Phillips's behavior and its impact on the store's finances. We gathered our evidence and prepared to make our case. But before we could take our concerns any further, things took a sinister turn. Rachel disappeared one night after her shift. She had been conducting her own investigation into Manager Phillips, and we feared that she had crossed a line that put her in danger. We reported her disappearance to the police, but there was no sign of her. It was as though she had vanished without a trace, leaving us with a growing sense of dread and helplessness. Mike and I were now the only ones left to unravel the mystery of Manager Phillips. We knew that we were risking our own safety, but we couldn't turn back. We had to uncover the truth, not only for Rachel's sake, but for our own as well. We continued to gather evidence, documenting every irregularity and suspicious behavior we could find. The financial discrepancies grew more alarming, and it became clear that Manager Phillips was siphoning money from the store for reasons known only to him. One night, as I was going through some old records in the break room, I discovered something creeped me out. I found a photo of Manager Phillips with a group of people, all dressed in robes, standing in front of a dark, imposing building. It was the same building I had seen in my dreams, the one that haunted me with its foreboding presence. The photo was old, faded, but there was no mistaking Manager Phillips's face among the group. It was as though he had a connection to that sinister place. I showed the photo to Mike, and he recognized the building as well. It was located on the outskirts of town, and it had always been associated with rumors of strange rituals and secretive gatherings. With this new piece of evidence, we decided to investigate the building ourselves. We couldn't ignore the possibility that it held the key to uncovering Manager Phillips's dark secret. Late one night, we drove to the location, our hearts pounding with anticipation and fear. The building loomed before us, a dark and imposing structure that seemed to radiate malevolence. We knew we were walking into the unknown, and we were prepared for whatever we might find. As we entered the building, the air grew cold and the silence was oppressive. We made our way through a cloudy lit hallway, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The building was filled with strange symbols and markings, and the walls seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Finally, we reached a large, cavernous chamber, and what we saw inside made our blood run cold. Manager Phillips stood at the center of the room, surrounded by a group of robed figures. They were engaged in a ritual, their voices raised in a chant. In the center of the room was an altar, and on it lay a figure covered by a black shroud. It was Rachel, unconscious and seemingly lifeless. Manager Phillips was overseeing the ritual, his eyes filled with a manic intensity. We watched in horror as the ritual reached its climax. The figures chanted louder, and the air crackled with an unnatural energy. And then the unthinkable happened. Rachel's body began to twitch and convulse, and she let out a haunting scream. It was as though she were being possessed by some dark force. We couldn't bear to watch any longer, and we turned to flee. But before we could escape, we were discovered by Manager Phillips and his followers. They cornered us in the chamber, their eyes filled with a fanatic zeal. Manager Phillips spoke in a voice that was not his own, his words filled with an eerie resonance. He revealed the true nature of his secret, a pact with a sinister entity that granted him power and knowledge beyond comprehension. He offered us a choice: join him in his dark endeavors or become sacrifices to the entity he served. We refused to submit to his twisted desires, and a battle ensued. It was a desperate struggle for our lives, as we fought against Manager Phillips and his followers, determined to stop their sinister ritual. As we grappled with them, we managed to disrupt the ritual, freeing Rachel from the entity's grip. She was weakened and traumatized, but she was alive. In the end, we managed to escape the building, leaving Manager Phillips and his followers behind. We reported the incident to the police, but they found no trace of the manager or his group when they arrived at the scene. The experience left us scarred and haunted, but we knew that we had done the right thing. We had uncovered Manager Phillips's dark secret and put an end to his dark plans. We never returned to that Walmart store, and we never saw Manager Phillips again. But the memory of that night, of the sinister rituals and dark entity, would haunt us for the rest of our lives. As we moved on, we couldn't help but wonder how many other secrets were hidden in the most ordinary of places, waiting to be discovered by those brave or foolish enough to seek them out. The world was full of mysteries, some more terrifying than we could ever imagine, and we had come face to face with one of them. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening when I decided to make a quick trip to Walmart. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting the sprawling parking lot into darkness. A flickering streetlight hummed above me as I exited my car. I shook it off as a result of the chilly autumn air, reminding myself that Walmart was just a stone's throw away, and I'd be inside the well-lit store in no time. I strolled through the automatic sliding doors, greeted by the familiar overhead hum of fluorescent lights and the sight of endless aisles filled with products of every kind. There's something oddly comforting about the predictability of Walmart even at night. Rows of neatly stacked shelves, the faint smell of plastic and cleaning supplies, the muffled chatter of employees and late-night shoppers. It was all so ordinary. I had come for a few essentials, so I grabbed a shopping cart and began to browse. The soft squeaking of wheels echoed around me as I navigated through the labyrinthine aisles. My footsteps seemed unusually loud against the linoleum floor, but I shrugged it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. I picked up a box of cereal, some milk, and a few other items, steadily making my way toward the checkout lanes. As I turned into the snack aisle, something caught my eye. A man in a faded green hoodie. He was standing near the potato chips, his head buried in a bag as if he were genuinely shopping. At first, there was nothing remarkable about him, just another shopper in a Walmart hoodie. But then, something about his posture struck me as odd. He seemed tense, like a predator sizing up its prey. He didn't glance my way, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, studying me. It made my blood freeze, making me hesitate. I continued down the aisle, glancing over my shoulder to find him still there, pretending to examine bags of chips. I quickened my pace, now acutely aware of my surroundings. Every aisle I turned into, he was there, never too close but always within my line of sight. Panic started to creep in, and I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was just doing his shopping and I was reading too much into it. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. When I reached the personal care aisle, I decided to test my theory. I grabbed a random item off the shelf, a bottle of shampoo I didn't even need, and headed for the electronics section. If he was following me, he'd have to reveal his true intentions. Sure enough, as I entered the electronics section, he followed. I tried to act nonchalant, glancing at the TVs and browsing the video games, but my heart raced. There was no doubt now he was following me. Fear constricted my chest as I considered my options. I couldn't confront him directly. I needed help. I reached for my phone, but a quick glance told me I had no signal. Walmart's notorious dead spots, I thought. Panic set in as I realized I was on my own. I decided to make a beeline for the front of the store, where there were always employees at the registers. The man could be a harmless coincidence, but my gut told me otherwise. I picked up the pace, my cart squeaking loudly in protest. I passed through the clothing section, then the home goods aisle, but he stayed with me, never more than a few aisles away. I could feel his eyes on me, and I knew he was closing in. Finally, I reached the main thoroughfare of the store, lined with registers and manned by Walmart employees. I hurriedly pushed my cart toward the closest checkout lane, relief washing over me. The cashier, a young woman with a friendly smile, scanned my items and made small talk as she worked. But just as I was starting to calm down, I saw him. The man in the green hoodie was standing a few lanes away, pretending to examine a display of candy bars. He wasn't shopping. He was watching me, waiting for his chance. I paid for my items, thanked the cashier, and made a quick decision. Instead of heading for the exit, I turned and pushed my cart toward the pharmacy section at the back of the store. It was further away from the entrance, but it was also less crowded, and I hoped I could lose him there. As I walked, I took a deep breath and tried to think rationally. I needed to find a store employee and alert them to the situation. I knew I couldn't confront this man on my own. But where were the employees? It was as if the store had emptied out, leaving only me and the stalker. I turned a corner and entered the pharmacy area. It was eerily quiet, with only the soft hum of fluorescent lights above. I scanned the rows of medicine and health products, desperately searching for a store employee. There was no one in sight. I felt a cold sweat forming on my brow as I continued to push my cart. My heart pounded in my chest, and every sound, every shadow, seemed amplified. The man in the green hoodie was still behind me, closer now, his footsteps echoing ominously on the linoleum floor. I rounded another corner and my heart sank. There, standing in front of me, was a display of Halloween masks and costumes. Rows of plastic faces leered at me, grotesque and terrifying. The irony of the situation hit me. The scariest thing in the store wasn't a mask, it was the man following me. I knew I couldn't keep running forever. My phone still had no signal and there were no store employees in sight. I had to make a stand, find a way to escape this nightmare. I glanced around, searching for anything that could help me. That's when I saw it, a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. It was my only chance. I approached it, trying to remain calm. The man was now just a few feet away, his eyes locked on me, a sinister grin playing on his lips. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed the fire extinguisher and aimed it at him. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice quivering but determined. The man froze, his grin fading into a look of surprise. Whoa, calm down," he said, holding up his hands. "I'm not here to hurt you." I wasn't convinced. "Then why are you following me?" I demanded, my finger on the extinguisher's trigger. He hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "I'm not following you. I work here, in loss prevention. I thought you might be a shoplifter." My heart pounded in my chest as I considered his words. Could he be telling the truth? I lowered the fire extinguisher slightly, but I didn't put it down. "You're a Walmart employee?" I asked, still on edge. "Yes," he replied, his hands still raised. "I'm just doing my job, trying to prevent theft. I'm sorry if I scared you." I looked around, finally noticing the security cameras placed throughout the store. It made sense. He was an employee trying to protect the store's assets. I felt a wave of embarrassment wash over me as I realized my mistake. I thought you were stalking me," I admitted, feeling foolish. He nodded sympathetically. "I can see how it might have looked that way. I should have introduced myself and explained, but I didn't want to blow my cover." Relief flooded through me as I lowered the fire extinguisher completely and handed it back to him. "I'm sorry for overreacting," I said, my voice shaky. "It's just that, well, it's been a really strange night." He offered a friendly smile. "No worries. I'm Chris, by the way. I promise I won't be following you anymore." We both chuckled nervously, and I finally started to relax. Chris walked me to the front of the store where other employees were now visible at the registers. He explained the situation to a manager who assured me they would review the security footage to confirm everything was okay. As I left the store, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. What had started as a routine trip to Walmart had turned into a terrifying ordeal, all because of a misunderstanding. I realized that sometimes fear can distort our perceptions and lead us to make rash decisions. From that night on, I never looked at Walmart the same way. It was no longer just a place to shop. It was a reminder that even the most ordinary settings can become the backdrop for a terrifying encounter. And as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man in the green hoodie had given me a glimpse into the darker side of the ordinary world. A world where shadows lurked in every aisle, and fear could turn even the most mundane moments into a nightmare.